Afghanistan, Zahid Hussain, to talk further on this issue. But as a moderator, I'll be very quick at introducing both my speakers today or the panelists today, although Zahid Saab doesn't need an introduction, but that's part of my mandate. To start with, our author of today, Dr. Saira Aquil, is a faculty member at the Defense and Strategic Studies Department, Qaeda University. And not only has she authored this book, which is in the academic circle considered publishing a book is the height of your academic achievement, but she has published a lot on civil-military relations, state building, conflict mitigation, international security, and she has a host of publications both at the international as well as national level. And she has also presented her study at the WISC Global International Studies Conference that was held in Germany. My second speaker of today, Mr. Zahid Hussain, is a very well-known, internationally acclaimed journalist as well as a writer. Zahid has a host of publications and books to his credit. He has been the Woodrow Wilson Fellow or Scholar at Washington, D.C. 2011-2012. And if I start mentioning Zahid's list of books, that would take us at least 5-10 minutes, and we are very pressed for time. So without further ado, I would first like to engage Saira and ask you, Saira, I mean, going through this book, which looks pretty thin and precise, but it is actually a very, very detailed description of what was happening in Afghanistan. And you've not only covered this, you've also provided us with a background premise of the old Afghanistan before this modern state making of Afghanistan. And besides that, you have also given us a glimpse of what was happening during the Soviet time frame, the post-Soviet time frame, and what led to the Taliban and then the US coming into power. But to me, your main thesis is based on the 4th and the 5th chapter, where you're talking about the exclusionary democratization process as being the key to all the problem. And then you also talk about what comes first, security or democratization or making of institution. Saira, you have 5 maximum minutes to talk about that, and then over to Zahid to dwell on the same issue. Thank you, Saira.
Thank you, Salma. Thank you, OUP, and thank you all of you who have come to attend this talk. If you have seen the book and if you've seen the title, it clearly says that Destined to Fail. As Salma has said, that the main thesis of the book is basically in the democratization process in the post-Taliban Afghanistan, and later is the state impediments, which I have talked about in this book. Now, the democratization process problems actually started from the Bonn Conference. Because from the beginning, the entire project, which was designed, organized by the principal intervener of United States of America, it was not well crafted. They never took in account what were the cultural and the societal realities of Afghanistan. For them, it was very easy to bring an American-style democracy in post-Taliban Afghanistan. Let's have a presidential form of government. Let's have a parliament. Let's talk to the warlords and make them political entrepreneurs of Afghanistan, in the power structure of Afghanistan. So when they started the democratization process, the exclusionism was the hallmark of the entire process. They kept the Taliban outside the process from where actually the problem started. And by making alliances with the warlord, challenges the spirit of democratization in Afghanistan. So the powers, they were competing power centers existing throughout the intervening years in Afghanistan. So having said that, I would like to say that all the spirit of democracy was challenged in the process which they initiated with their intervention in Afghanistan. And at the same time, all the electoral exercises which they have done, framing of constitution, creating the office of president, it's all only the technical features of democracy, which I have also mentioned in my book and in that chapter, that is basically a procedural democracy. There was nothing substantive in the democracy. And they also realized this fact later on, that we need to bring the non-Pashtun elements also in the power structure, Pashtun elements, sorry, in the power structure. Initially, it was very non-Pashtun, but it was quite late. Just having the president, Pashtun president, did not solve all the problems in Afghanistan. So, the democratization process was not all a lone process. To strengthen the democracy, you required state institutions. And that state's institutions were created on the lines which were barbarian theoretically, but practically they were very parochial in nature. So they have a very limited and narrow mind thinking how to create the state institutions in Afghanistan. And the debate always remained in White House, whether it was Bush regime, whether it was Obama regime. So what we should do with these institutions? Emphasis, where we should shift our emphasis, whether we should create the coercive institutions, whether we should put more money in the civilian institution. And that debate continued for the 2 decades which they remained in Afghanistan. But we have seen practically the preference has always been to create the muscle approach, create the coercive institution in Afghanistan, which actually created problems in Afghanistan, in the state institutions. And that's why the society disengaged itself from the institutions which they have created, because the institutions' writ was only in the provincial capitals, in the urban area. So the rural populations remained disengaged by the entire process of democracy and state building in Afghanistan.
Thank you so much, Saira. That was very crisp and precise. Zahid, Saira has mentioned a couple of things. US being the principal architect, US not having an idea, not having a very inclusionary approach, looking at the peripheries as well, the procedure, the muscle approach. So the project Afghanistan failed altogether. Would you also agree to that, or you think there are some small segments that have helped Afghanistan process to this point? And whatever you want to say in your 5 minutes.
Well, thank you so much. I think it's a very valuable contribution to the post-Afghan situation, but obviously the book has dealt with whatever is happening over the last 20 years, and that's very important. Let me start with, you have mentioned Bonn Agreement. And I think Lakhdar Brahimi, who was the UN Special Envoy and supposed to be the architect of Bonn Agreement, 2-3 years later, after the Bonn Agreement, in an interview said that it was original sin. And that's exactly what happened at Bonn. And it was basically whatever happened in Afghanistan over the next 20 years was largely because the way the Bonn Agreement was done. And very interesting, the Americans did not know anything about Afghanistan when they went in. And if you remember, it was the Javed Zarif, who was then the Iranian special envoy representing at Bonn, and later on become the foreign minister of Iran. He basically brought all the warring factions together. Otherwise, the Americans could not have made them to reach some kind of agreement. And in fact, actually, then after the Bonn Agreement was signed, the American envoy thanked the Iranian. But basically, the problem was 2 things what happened. The factions, the Afghan faction, about 6 or 7 of them, who formed the government or transition government was supposed to be, most of them had lived outside Afghanistan throughout that period. And the one thing about Pakistan's position, I think we made many mistakes, but I can say one thing about that we have been very consistent about one position, that Bonn meeting should have been broadened, and whatever was called moderate section of Taliban should also have been included. And exactly same thing Lakhdar Brahimi conceded 2 or 3 years later. When actually the other problem was about Americans went to Afghanistan out of revenge, out of anger. Whatever happened after 9/11, they did not have any choice. So supposedly they did not have any choice, and they got into Afghanistan. But they were not very clear actually why did they go there. Initially it was said they just wanted to destroy the Al-Qaeda network, and obviously Taliban government was toppled within few days. But later on, they were completely clueless. And so initially, when President Bush, they said actually we are not there for nation building or to make the country democratic. But later on, as the situation developed, and Obama administration, and the main theme was nation building. So there would always be a contradiction within the American policy. And some of the top American officials, and in fact, actually one of them was a Deputy National Security Advisor who was also in Bush administration and Obama administration. He also, that cigar, this is kind of, that body which was formed by the United States to see into the Afghan affair. And he was quoted as saying that we did not know what we were doing in Afghanistan. And that exactly happened. And when the Americans left, it was like actually the circle, it was full circle now. The Taliban came back to power, and Afghanistan is back to the same period where it was left in 1990s.
Saira, interestingly, your book comes out at a time when your thesis, actually, you can go around and say, see, I told you. So you have that moment. And that's a very rare thing because many a times you end up writing a thesis and something very different happens, right? So, but here you have, I told you so. So you told us what was going to happen. But now that it has happened and the Taliban are back in power, and at one point when you were analyzing the previous Taliban regime or the previous generation of the Taliban leadership, you did talk about the centrality and you did talk about the alternate that they were bringing to the system. But then there was, again, things that went wrong. This time, this second round of the Taliban, people kind of create a lot of similarities. They think they're different. They don't think that they're different. But again, here is something which are two factors that your book talks about, especially when it comes to the external powers role. Their experiment at democratization or their experiment at state-making in Afghanistan. And in comparison to that, both the Taliban regimes had an answer to that. So, although the verdict is somewhat out, what do you see? What is going to happen? What is your next I told you so moment here?
Okay, you have given me an idea for my next book, actually. I was thinking of writing on how the Taliban will going to do the state building in Afghanistan. Two things we have to keep in mind. That the center of gravity in Afghanistan is Kabul. Whoever's controls Kabul controls Afghanistan. Now, in today's Afghanistan, under the Taliban rule, we have seen, and we have witnessing in the last 2 years, that the Kabul approach towards the world and the Kandahar approach towards the world is slightly different. So Habibatullah, which is residing in Kandahar, he's more localized, domesticized in his approach, more religious, talking about that everything should be according to Sharia. But the people who are sitting in Kabul, holding different ministries and cabinet position, they have a different worldview. They wanted to be more open with the world. So this generation of Taliban, I must say, it's not the same which we have witnessed in the 90s. They're far more smarter. They understand the international system. They understand the world politics. They understand that we have been brought into power by the power who has left, the Americans. We entered into a deal with them. It was a very minimalist reconciliation agreement. We gave them guarantees, but we are here to stay. So if we have to stay in power, we have to work in the liberal international order. We cannot work outside the order. So whenever they go outside and talk to the Chinese and the Russians, they never take their gods on the table. They take their realist interest on the table. The interest which is related with how to run the state. And I'd also like to add that all the ministries were not dissolved. Some of the technical ministries are still working in Kabul. For example, the Ministry of Revenue and Taxation is the favorite of Taliban. So they are diligent tax collectors. They have been able to control corruptions. They have been able to bring down the criminal rate. But at the same time, there is a contradiction still existing within Afghanistan that how we can operate in the liberal international system and at the same time we can have a Sharia sort of government in Afghanistan. So that contradiction still exists in different circles of Taliban.
I'm so sorry. I'm kind of trying to keep it as precise. I've already been given this 15 minutes notice. Zahid, your view. If you were to look at what happens next in Kabul. Would the Taliban regime be able to actually gradually come up with a process which is close to democracy come state building, or again there's going to be some new Kabul or rebuilding of Kabul exercise that is going to take place by the future actors?
I think when Taliban came to power, and it was actually foretold because of Doha Agreement was a document of surrender by the Americans. So would say that Taliban came suddenly, I think is completely wrong, because when Americans were signed that agreement or deal with Taliban, it means they had recognized that Taliban would be the future government in Afghanistan. And whatever happened later on, we all know. So how did the whole system collapse? But Taliban, but initially when they came to power, there was hope that it will be Taliban 02. And it would be different from the previous Taliban rules. And there was some strong reasons to believe that, because the Taliban delegation, which negotiated with Americans in Doha, have a different approach altogether. Those were the people who had much greater exposure of the world. They were not like actually the Taliban leadership of the 90s, who had never, probably most of them, particularly Mullah Omar, has never traveled outside Afghanistan. So, so the delegation, and that's what they appeared very moderate. They had been living in Doha for many years, and even Mullah brother, who had been in prison for so many years and then released and sent to Doha, he had also has some kind of moderate views. Moderate is always actually relative, in relative sense. And that was when Taliban finally took over. And first 3 or 4 months, it seemed that Taliban has changed. You know, they allowed women to work, continue to work. They allowed, free press. The televisions were allowed, which was unthinkable in 1990s. But this kind of moderation disappeared after 6 months. What happened then, it also reflected the power struggle within the Taliban. One should also understand that the Taliban, which ruled in 1990s under Mullah Omar, has has a different, I'm not saying worldview may have been same, but certainly those were the people who were, the product of a long war against Soviet Union, and that's how actually they came to, and most of them came from religious background. But here actually they were much more. Then what happened, I think what happened is that the clerics or the clergy, which was represented by Habatullah, took over the decision. And how the faction, internal faction worked there, could also be seen that, remember actually at one point, they agreed to open girls' secondary schools. And in the morning, that order was canceled. So I think I'll just one word, what I see actually Afghanistan happening, 2 things. Number one, one can recognize the fact that after 20 years of war and violence, Afghanistan may be more peaceful. And the expectation or the fear of the world that it will collapse. And obviously, the famine and 90% of the population did not know where the food will come. That did not happen. Taliban have taken a dual policy. On the one hand, they have implemented their more retrogressive system, but on the other hand, they are very soft. They are also dealing with the Western world, and in a certain way. And the problem.
Both the speakers to turn off their mic so that the sound system works better. We have less than 10 minutes now, and I would like to see questions from the audience. Please keep them sweet and precise, but also language की restriction नहीं है. But please बहुत लंबी statements ना कीजिए. बहुत crisp और precise question करें. I will take 2 questions at a time, and जी ये पीछे जो बैठे हुए हैं आप जी start asking your question till you get the mic. Kindly identify the person you want to ask the question from.
Assalamu alaikum. I am Fahim Gul of student of National Defense University. My question to Ma'am Salma is that after the post-withdrawal of US in in Afghanistan, the cross-border violations between Pakistan and Afghanistan are increasing day by day, and Pakistan is claiming that Afghanistan is responsible, and at the same time Afghanistan is just not accepting at all. So what you think that the repercussions, who is the responsible of these repercussions that are...
Thank you. Got your question. Ji, question number 2.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Zahid Gilani and I'm from Qaeda University, Islamabad. I have a very simple question from Dr. Saira. Madam, आपको क्या लगता है कि जैसे हम पैटर्न्स देखते हैं, अगर हम अफ़गानिस्तान के या मिडल ईस्ट के भी कॉन्फ्लिक्ट रीजन जितने भी हैं, तो आपके ख़्याल में ये जो वेस्टर्न डेमोक्रेसी की हम बात करते हैं, ये सिस्टम जो है यहाँ पर एप्लीकेबल है भी कि नहीं, और यहाँ पर क्योंकि ट्राइबल सोसाइटी है, तो इस बारे में आपका क्या ख्याल है कि ये एक फेलियर है और क्यों नहीं?
Thank you. Okay, I think I can quickly take 2 more questions. Would that be okay with you both? And then we can have the answers. Ji.
Thank you. My name is Khalid Banuri. Question to both panelists. There's this sense about conflict resolution that you identify all the parties that are involved, and then you bring a conflict resolution model that is acceptable to all parties. Is that even possible in Afghanistan? Thank you.
I think 3 काफ़ी ठीक है. जी बच्चे, जी आप कीजिए.
Thank you so much. My name is Afaq Amin and I'm a lecturer from Edwards College, Peshawar. And I have just one question that there is a book of Samuel Beckett, Waiting for Godot. So what we are waiting for? There is an evacuation right now in Pakistan of Afghanis. So could you please tell me what is our role nowadays? What we are waiting for?
We are waiting for that Godot to tell us who's our Godot.
Exactly.
Right?
Thank you.
Hello.
Regarding the first question, regarding the related to with Durand Line, related to the border management, it is a serious concern for Pakistan, that how we have to deal with the border management issues, especially the acceptance of Durand Line. I think the acceptance of Durand Line with the parties who have ruled Kabul has always been a question. And still we have to convince the Taliban that it is the international border between Pakistan and Afghanistan, and now we have fenced it. So you have to accept it as an international legal border between the 2 countries. So the question still remained. For us, it is a done thing, but for the Taliban, they kept on raising this issue on a number of forums. How to manage it? Yes, we need a mechanism which served both sides of the borders. Pakistan and Afghanistan together needs to work on this issue. Again, I would like to say that it's something which can be managed through negotiation. It's something which can manage through tolerance and trust among the parties which are dealing with this issue. The second question related with Zahid ने जो पूछा था कि democracy आ सकती है अफगानिस्तान में या नहीं आ सकती है. Zahid, democracy के लिए कुछ certain prerequisites होना बड़े ज़रूरी होते हैं. और वो प्री रेक्विजिट अफगानिस्तान की अगर आप हिस्ट्री भी देखें तो बड़े वो मिनिमम थे. आपको एक सर्टन आपको स्टेट इंस्टीट्यूशंस चाहिए होते हैं बड़े स्ट्रॉन्ग अगर आपने डेमोक्रेसी को सक्सेस कराना है. मॉडर्न डेमोक्रेसी कैन नॉट ऑपरेट विदाउट अ स्टेबल स्ट्रॉन्ग स्टेट. सो वो चीज़ जो है वो मिसिंग रही है अफगानिस्तान में. और दूसरा, ट्राइबल कल्चर को इस न्यू फॉर्म ऑफ डेमोक्रेसी में मोल्ड करना ये बहुत जनरेशंस लगती हैं. डेमोक्रेसी का मसला ही सारा ये है कि डेमोक्रेसी आपकी अटैच होनी चाहिए सोशल चेंज के साथ, सोशल सिस्टम के साथ. अगर वो सोशल सिस्टम चेंज नहीं होगा तो डेमोक्रेसी भी सर्वाइव नहीं कर सकेगी. थर्ड क्वेश्चन, नाउ आई थिंक
Yes, we have. I have a
think
question.
Zahid
ma'am.
should can talk about Pakistan.
I think that one conflict resolution I think the problem with Afghanistan is that there are some problems, and I think probably it will be very difficult for the international community to recognize the Taliban government. But at the same time, there is also a huge problem with the international community, that they don't want Taliban government to fall, because the repercussion will be quite dreadful. And if Taliban government goes, it will be like, for example, a vacuum will be created, and it will be a civil war in Afghanistan that would endanger the security of not only the regional countries, but also will have some implications for the international community. So I think probably what I see is that some kind of not recognition, but certainly some kind of dealing with the Taliban government, and that will continue. And I think probably that suits both the Taliban and the international community to have this kind of relationship. As far as democracy is concerned, look, actually, Afghanistan has seen a period of so-called democratic process during American occupation of Afghanistan. But that is not like actually, it could be like actually implanted democracy. It did not come through the social changes or within the country. So that, which is imposed by a kind of invading force, cannot work for the long. And
thank you so much. We have space for before my pretty timekeeper or time watcher tells me that it's 0 minutes left. So please, gentlemen in the front.
All right, ma'am, thank you. Within the international liberal system, तालिबान की जो ideological standing है, वो कहीं ना कहीं पाकिस्तान के अंदर भी public opinion को influence कर रहा है. तो आप इसको किस जाविये से देखते हैं?
Ma'am, I have a question. So my name is Muhammad Akam. I am from Qaid-e-Azam University. So there is a conspiracy theory that destabilizing Afghanistan was a part of greater game by US to keep in check the China rise. So what do you think? Is this conspiracy theory true? What are your viewpoints about this?
So China को नीचे दिखाना है तो तालिबान को और अफगानिस्तान को engage रखिए. Good question. And the young gentleman's question in the front. Both of you have half a minute.
Okay. Regarding Taliban and the liberal international system, देखें तालिबान के पास अफगानिस्तान के अंदर तो ये चॉइस है कि वो शरिया नाफिज कर लें और वो जेंडर को जो वेमेंस के साथ उनका एक अपना एक पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू है वो कर लें, लेकिन उन्हें पैसे तो इंटरनेशनल वर्ल्ड से ही चाहिए ना रूल करने के लिए. तो वो पैसे तो हैं, वो जो वेस्टर्न फाइनेंशियल इंस्टीट्यूशंस है वो अपनी टर्म्स पे देता है वो पैसे. और मैं आपको यहाँ एक और बात भी बता दूँ कि पिछले 2 सालों के अंदर $2.2 बिलियन उन्होंने ह्यूमैनिटेरियन एड में उनको मिलेंगे और करंटली आई थिंक सो $1.2 बिलियन उनको मिल गए हैं. सिमिलरली इंडिया से भी उनको पैसे मिले हैं. तो वो आउटसाइड वर्ल्ड के साथ उनकी एंगेजमेंट है, बट एंगेजमेंट में जो आउटसाइड इंटरनेशनल कम्युनिटी है, जैसे जाहिद ने भी कहा, जो बड़ा सही बताया कि उनकी एंगेजमेंट जो तालिबान के साथ है वो ज़रा कॉन्शियस टाइप की एंगेजमेंट है. बट एट द सेम टाइम उन्होंने एक्सेप्ट कर लिया उन्हें, लेकिन वो रिकग्निशन देने को तैयार नहीं है. तो ड्यूल गेम दोनों तरफ से इस वक्त हो रही है. सेकेंडली अगर हम बात करते हैं कि कॉन्स्पिरेसी थेरीज़ की, अब कॉन्स्पिरेसी थेरीज़ तो हर किस्म की है. 9/11 इटसेल्फ इज़ अ कॉन्स्पिरेसी थेरी. लेकिन चाइना को कंटेन करना, अब आप चाइना का रोल देखें अफगानिस्तान में. चाइना ने अपना डिप्लोमेटिक रोल प्ले करना शुरू कर दिया है. चाइना का एम्बेसडर भी अफगानिस्तान में आ गया. चाइनीज़ के लिए वीज़ेस भी ओपन हो गए अफगान्स के लिए. चाइनीज़ अफगान स्टूडेंट्स को भी एडमिशन मिलेगा चाइनीज़ यूनिवर्सिटीज़ में. चाइनीज़ ने मिनरल्स की एक्सप्लोरेशंस के भी उनके साथ डील्स कर ली हैं. सो द चाइनीज़ आर गुड. वन बेल्ट वन रोड में भी है. तो आई थिंक कंटेनमेंट फॉर द मोमेंट वाज अ ऑब्वियसली पॉलिसी ऑब्जेक्टिव हो सकता है यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स ऑफ अमेरिका का ड्यूरिंग द इंटरवीनिंग पीरियड में, लेकिन जब आपने छोड़ के चले गए तो अब उनकी कंटेनमेंट कैसे होगी? अब तो चाइना अपना रोल और मजबूत करेगा अफगानिस्तान में.
Zahid, the time is up, but if you want to just squeeze in half a minute.
कि खाली जो it said about Pakistan, implications for Pakistan. देखें जो हुआ है इस वक्त हो रहा है वो एक लिहाज से प्रिडिक्टेबल था. मतलब आप बहुत से लोगों का ख्याल था कि तालिबान की हुकूमत आएगी और पाकिस्तान की वेस्टर्न बॉर्डर जो है वो सिक्योर हो जाएगी, और ये हमेशा से हमारे जो थिंकर जो पॉलिसी मेकर थे उनकी थी, लेकिन एक एप्रीहेंशन भी था, और वो हमेशा से था कि तालिबान वापस आते हैं तो उसकी कॉन्सिक्वेंस पाकिस्तान के ऊपर बहुत ज़्यादा पड़ेंगे, क्योंकि सिचुएशन इट इज़ नॉट 1990 सिचुएशन. पाकिस्तान हैज ऑलरेडी गॉन थ्रू अ पीरियड जहाँ पे दे हैड टू फाइट इंसर्जेंसी, जो कि टीटीपी के नाम से, एंड टीटीपी जो है आइडियोलॉजिकली या उनका वर्ल्ड व्यू जो है नॉट वेरी डिफरेंट फ्रॉम द अफगान तालिबान, एंड वो होना था जो आज हम देख रहे हैं कि जो बॉर्डर के पास से जो ये सपोर्ट मिल रही है, तो इट वॉज वेल नोन. अब क्या होता है कि हाउ डू पाकिस्तानी स्टेट डील विद दिस सिचुएशन, वो बहुत बड़ा चैलेंज है.
Thank you, Zahid. Only you could respond to such a complex question in half a second, half a minute actually. I'm extremely grateful to both my panelists, to Saira. Heartiest congratulations, of course, in order. And thank you for coming up with such a wonderful piece of writing. In Pakistan, we usually don't write much. हमने जाहिद साहब को डेलीगेट किया हुआ है कि वो हर 2 साल में अच्छा सा मास्टरपीस दें ताकि हम उसको पढ़ के आर्टिकल्स में कोट करें. So now we have another author who's working on Afghanistan and looking at things. From this question of what is the perfect conflict resolution model for Afghanistan, whether we should look at peace or we should look at stability or we should have them both hand in hand. I think the US tried. I think all the wise men in the room tried to put the egg back into its shell. But the verdict is out, and as our dear friend just mentioned here, we keep waiting for that Godot to come and solve the problems for us. But one can only hope and pray that in the coming days, people tend to read more about the indigenous literature that is coming out, and we try and come up with our own solutions, and we remain wiser. Instead of using the muscle approach alone, we also look at the various approaches to conflict resolution and other factors. Time is never enough when you're looking at such complicated issues and when you're talking about a book, but I know our organizers have a lot spanned out for them, and I thank once again both the panelists, to the OUP team, and to the wonderful volunteers in this hall for helping us process this particular session. Thank you very much. The panel is off.